Bring in more revenue while saving money and differentiate yourself from the rest of the pack vying to win those guests by becoming more environmentally friendly. We will show you how easy it is and how cheap it can be, if not free, and share all the opportunities available. So join us each week as we take another step along the green path. That's one more step to differentiate yourself from the rest of the pack. The Green Path podcast is kindly sponsored by Sestonica, the first sustainability recognition for vacation rental homes. What if vacation rental professionals could influence millions of travellers to make their own homes more sustainable? Show the world that you have taken steps to make your vacation rental consume less and get your badge on sestonica.com. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Green Path podcast. Whether you have started on your Green Path journey or are still contemplating it, one of the things you need to do is research where to buy products that will make a difference. For example, that toothbrush you use daily, what's the handle made from? It never occurred to me until I was researching today's guest. Yes, plastic toothbrush handles. And what about the cotton buds or the Q-tips that you use? Yep, more plastic. My guest today has simplified things for you. We're going to learn about the one place, if you're based in the UK, that you can get all you need to make a difference. Today, my guest is Thomas Panton from Canopey. Hello, Thomas. How are you?
Hi, Deborah. Yeah, great intro. I'm well. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you very much for coming along today and joining me. Thomas, I always like to start with your personal journey before Canopey. How did you get going on your sustainability path?
Yeah, I mean, look, it was I don't think it was meant to be to begin with. I'll start there. But so originally, when I was younger, I was actually an international swimmer, and I had always thought that was going to be what I do. You know, I was going to swim, I was going to get sponsored, I was going to go to the Olympics. You know, the big dreams, the big ambitions, and it was definitely along that path. But then I got injured, and it completely changed, like, everything that I had envisaged sort of doing as an individual, and had to quite rapidly work out what I was going to do going forward now that I didn't have this one thing that I'd sort of like hooked onto and was really good at, and, you know, hadn't really thought about anything else. And, you know, this was during time, you know, I was late teens, so all my friends were going to uni. I had never really thought I was going to go to uni. I thought I was just going to swim. But that seemed like the logical choice at the time. I had absolutely no idea what else to do. So, and my dad's an architect, and I was like, well, I don't want to go and work for the family architectural practice. And my sister's far more artistic than me. I'll let her take that on. So then I sort of ran my finger down the list, and, you know, ended up on politics and international relations, and was like, that sounds interesting, getting into, you know, all of the the difficult conversations of what's happening around the world. And went to the University of East Anglia in Norwich. Now, UEA, as it's widely known, really prides itself on sort of its drive for international development and sustainability and climate science. It's partnered with the Tyndall Centre for Climate Research, and, you know, it's got all of this fantastic research around that sector coming out of it. And when I went into my undergraduate degree, I hadn't really thought about going into that side of things, but that was obviously going to be there. And during my time, you know, studying sort of international relations, one of the big things that came out of that was you learn a lot about sort of lobbying groups, NGOs, IGOs like the UN as well. And the one that really caught my attention was Greenpeace. So the world's largest independent environmental organization, making change since the 1970s, well known for their big whaling campaign back in the 70s and 80s. And I was really impassioned by what they do. And it just so happened that it really reminded me of, I don't know if you ever watched Al Gore's documentary.
Way back, yeah.
Way back when, and I was a kid when that came out, and you know, it's sort of one of those things that you see and you're like, oh, that's terrible, and then I'm a kid, so I was like, okay, on with my life. But my parents were very aware of it. So when I went back home and was talking about Greenpeace, they were like, oh yeah, like, we're members of Greenpeace. We you know, we're passionate about Greenpeace and what they're doing, and one of my friends was working for them. So it was a natural development from there onwards for me to go, I'm surrounded by people who are passionate about this movement. I am beginning to learn more about it right at the start of my sort of higher education and career. I know someone who's working there. And yeah, it instantly sort of turned my focus to how I can get into that industry and how I can make a difference right at the beginning of that journey back when I was, 18.
Wow.
That's where it really started.
And what were you doing at Greenpeace?
So when I first joined, I was a foot soldier, a fundraiser. So I actually think it's the most undervalued, but probably hardest job to do at an organization. You're talking to thousands of people every month. You're having to explain why we're doing what we're doing, the campaigns, the science behind those campaigns. You become knowledgeable very quickly about a lot of different topics. So I was working on, campaigns, everything from plastic pollution to banks and the financing of fossil fuels, all the way to overfishing, to deforestation, and all of these campaigns were stuff that I had to be read up on and learn it about. So during my time as a fundraiser, that's what I was sort of having to do day in, day out. And then over my time working there, over sort of like half a decade, I moved my way into their events and outreach team, ended up sort of helping with the organization and setup of sort of these larger campaigns in wider events, wider festivals. And that became much more embedded in the actual action and sort of the relationship between the organization and real people. And what were their opinions? What were their barriers to supporting sustainability? Why were they struggling to change their lifestyles? Or if they had changed their lifestyles, why did they do it? And all of those questions, and really understanding that dynamic sort of relationship, not just between Greenpeace and them, but between the wider climate sector and the individual. I was really passionate about that.
The $64,000 question is, how did you get people to become more sustainable?
I think, look, it's not easy is the question. We live in a society which has been built around convenience.
Yeah.
And I think that actually, like, from a human perspective is fine. Like, we have developed as a species to make our lives easier, from medicine to travel, from consumerism to food and drink, whatever it is. It's always about, okay, how can we make this easier for an individual to do it? And whether that is to drive the economy or just to give happier sort of societies is the big question. But I do think that it's not really a problem in theory. The difficulty is that what's ended up happening is it's been driven without any consideration of the after impacts, the afterthoughts of that. And even with, and even from the beginning of manufacturing all the way to the end of use, like, we have not considered what that does to the planet and other species and even ourselves. Like, we eat a credit card's worth of plastic and it's found in human blood now. But we would never have thought that when we started the big plastic sort of boom in the 70s and 80s. So I think, how you get people to change is a really difficult question, because generally the climate sector has been like, you tell them how bad things are and you tell them why there is this big need to change, what happens if we don't change. And it works, but up to a point, because the majority of the population have other things closer to home going on. And when you're talking about huge global issues like climate change, it becomes incredibly difficult for the individual to relate to that. So actually, in a sentence, I'm actually a big believer in tying sustainability with convenience. And if you can bring those two things together for the individual, then you're far more likely to increase adoption rates. And that's everything from Greenpeace and onwards in my career has been focused and studied around how we can do that and how we can make it easier to be greener, basically.
From a marketing point of view, I would say sustainable, what did you just say? Sustainable
consumption, consumerism, I don't know, accessibility.
But with the silent sustainable.
Yeah, exactly.
Convenience. Sustainable convenience.
Yes.
Convenience. Silent sustainable. And I think then people will jump on board. Well, not jump on board, but it'll just become part of their daily life. And I think
Exactly
it's that word sustainable that is the obstacle,
Yeah. Well, it niches it down. So what we find is that there's a stereotype around the words eco-friendly, sustainable, green, and perhaps rightly so. Like those, or those sorts of movements and have been very much targeted at a specific type of person, probably me included. But the problem is that if that is the focus, then it's not for everyone. And actually, what we need is this thing to be for everyone. So the only way you can do that is, as you rightly say, is to make sort of sustainable shopping, or sustainable lifestyle just lifestyle. But actually, in the background, that it's having a better impact. So this is what not just my current company, Canopey, but also my previous company with Festovers was focused on, is not making the consumer or the individual feel like they have to do a lot of work to change things, but actually that these things are happening synonymously with how they live anyway. And then if you make that change, then you change adoption rates, you change the world, but you don't, people don't know you're doing it. And that's the important thing.
I think it would be the winner of the marketing campaign of the century if you can get people to adopt this sort of thing with the silent sustainable. And that would be a marketing coup. Absolutely. Now, you touched on Festovers. Before we get talking on Canopey, I like the idea of Festovers. So Festovers came before Canopey. I saw the photo on your website, and I thought, I've seen that before. Disgraceful. So can you tell us, how did Festovers start?
So, when I was working with Greenpeace, as I said, I sort of ended up in their events and festivals and conferences and all sorts of things. So I was well embedded within that industry, and looking at all of the various sustainable problems that were arising within that sector. And one of the big ones, as we all know, is the amount of consumer waste that's left at the end of these, particularly summer festivals. In the UK alone, 250,000 tents end up in landfill or incinerators every single year. Every tent is the equivalent of 8,750 plastic straws. This is a huge issue, polluting not just our atmosphere, but the very land that we're enjoying as festival goers. And again, the issue with tackling this has been every single campaign in that sector has been targeted at take your tent home as an individual, or, be conscious when you're coming to a festival, make sure that you are aware of what you're bringing and how you're using it. And I think, let's be real, right? Like when you're a 16, 17-year-old and you're going to your first festival, you're drinking without your parents knowing, you're probably doing some other stuff. You don't care about, after a 5-day weekend of like really heavy partying and enjoying yourself, are you going to really take down probably quite a large tent at that point and pack it up and carry it and take it in the summer heat? Like, I think that there needs to be a bit of reality check with the industry, because we're asking a lot of the individual. Now, I'm not trying to get rid of the responsibility. Like, I think that we all need to be aware, right? Like, we all need to be conscious of what we're doing. But I do think, like, the reason that I set up Festovers was that, look, you as the individual are inevitably going to leave something. And for a lot of those people, it's going to be leaving everything. And I think that if we can either stop them from bringing that stuff in the first place, or make sure that everything that's left doesn't end up in landfill and the incinerator, then you're solving a problem without the individual realizing you're solving it. So again, Festovers was built out of that. Well, look, there's all this waste being left. Much of it is reusable. So currently, just to give some context to the UK sector, is that there are charities, there are scavengers that come in at the end of festivals and collect leftover waste. But where most people think that they are collecting a lot of that waste, actually they're only collecting between 1% and 2% of leftover waste. So most of that, 98% up, is going into the incinerator still, even if we as consumers think that it's being collected and being used for homelessness or whatever the charity is. So Festovers was, look, the only way that you can do this is by having capital behind that, and the only way you can do that is by commercializing it. So we were the first, I set up the first company in the UK, Festovers, which commercialized the extending of that consumer product life at the end of events by getting festivals to pay you to come in to collect it, and then by using that waste as a commodity afterwards. So we cleaned it, and then we would sell on material, we'd resell the product if it was in good condition, or we'd rent it out. And it meant that, you know, when 1 to 2% was being collected and not ending up in landfill, the festivals that we worked at, it was between 90 and 95% of that waste was not ending up in landfill. So it's a huge change, and something which we managed to make sustainably economically quite quickly. The challenge is that when a global pandemic comes in the events industry, as an early stage company, it can somewhat decimate everything you've built. But yeah, that's where Festovers came from, and the problem we were solving. And look, that problem very much still exists.
Yeah.
But I think during the pandemic, and when the industry was sort of having many fallow years, it was like, how can we solve that problem at source? And actually a lot of that is, well, if we buy better products to begin with, better impact products which have better end of life sort of compostability or whatever it is, we're solving that problem before the consumer even leaves it. And if they do leave it, it doesn't matter as much. So it was a bit of a shift from solving a symptom to solving the problem at source.
My brain is just running around like mad thinking right now, Festovers should actually become rent a tent. If anyone bringing a tent, just rent it and leave it, wash it, reuse it next year, make the money, put it towards Greenpeace, whatever. But why is anyone buying and bringing a tent when there are so many, when they're all left there? Just
absolutely. So this is one of the big issues again, is that what festivals have done is they've set up pre-pitch models, which is fantastic, but they're really expensive. And they're expensive because of the labor or the time it takes to clean them, etc., etc. And there's reasons behind that, but I do think that it's been built, the model has been built purely commercially, which it doesn't need to be. It can still be profitable and be more affordable and be more accessible and be sustainable. So just before the pandemic, we were looking at solutions in which we had a prototype of a tent, which would essentially, we could pre-pitch, and it would only cost the individual 15 to 20 pounds extra on their festival ticket, and they wouldn't have to bring a tent. It would all be set up for them. It was a durable tent which lasted 10 years, and then the material could be reused. And we would create an affordable, accessible pre-pitch model where single-use tents wouldn't be used at festivals anymore. But the problem is that you've got to try and convince two sides of an industry to change the entire model. So you've got to change festivals, you've got to convince them to actually change their model and allow to make less money but still make money. And you've got to convince individuals that actually renting a tent, and I think there are ways around that. Like if you built it sort of like a cinema, like when you go to the cinema and you book your seats, you can book with friends. If you did the same thing with tents, it saves people being away from their friends. Anyway, there's lots of different ways we could do that, but I think the challenge will always be convincing the commercial side of that industry that if they're going to solve the sustainability side of that problem, they have to think profitably, but less, like it's got to be less profitable for more impact. And that's always a hard sell to festivals which have been running for decades, right? So but maybe we'll get there.
Well, if you want to brainstorm, I'm happy to talk later.
Okay,
So let's move on to Canopey. So you were talking about all the waste at Festover, and that led you to come up with Canopey?
Yeah, I think it was definitely the origin of that sort of moment of, well, if people were buying better to begin with, then one, they'd probably be less likely to leave it because it's a product that they value more. But also, secondly, if they did leave it and it's made out of better materials, then it wouldn't be as big an impact anyway. That sort of then developed. It was like looking at, okay, well, what's actually on the market already for those sorts of things, and why isn't that the mainstream? There are marketplaces that consider themselves to be ethical. There are sort of calculators which quantify impact, and it was like, well, why isn't the wider consumer market interacting with those platforms? And essentially what it comes down to is we found that there were three main barriers which fed into a confusing user journey. So it was like not enough knowledge, of why, where, what to buy. Not enough time to go and do that research, find them, and track the impact and whatever else. Like, it was too much of a ball ache to actually do it. And then thirdly was having the capital, because with a sustainable product, there's usually an uptick in price. But we can come on to this in a bit, but I'd argue that actually you're saving money over a longer period of time by buying a better product to begin with. But that's another conversation. And all of that feeds into this really convoluted journey for the individual to shop sustainably. Currently, you've got 4 different types of platforms. You've got verification platforms for claims. You've got shops, which consider themselves ethical, but maybe don't actually verify the claims that brands are making because they're not linked to those systems. Thirdly, you've got like learning platforms like blogs and apps which you can like learn how to make swaps and stuff. It's quite convoluted, quite a lot of work to understand how to do that. And then fourth, you've got like impact calculators as a generic term of how you track your impact and maybe get rewarded for it, but pretty unlikely. It's more of a way just to make yourself feel good. And none of them talk to each other, and none of them make it easy to go from one step to the next step. So look, as someone who's worked in the sector and who actually really cares about this topic, I find that too complicated. So when we went out and spoke to real people who weren't eco warriors, or weren't climate scientists, or maybe weren't even that climate conscious, but just sort of aware of this issue, it was just unanimous. Like, it's too complicated, it's too hard. I'm finding it too complicated to even try to shop sustainably. So like, you've got this huge barrier to entry, and along that journey you've got multiple barriers. So what we need to do is remove those barriers, streamline the user journey, and give back the trust to the consumer that work has been done for them. So Canopey sort of developed from this idea of we need to buy better, this sort of very top level statement, to let's build one platform which completely streamlines the sustainable shopping journey. And that's what Canopey is. It's the only platform that does that. We verify the claims of brands before they sell on the platform. So whatever you see has evidence behind it. And we've asked for evidence within parameters. So you as a consumer don't have to worry that it hasn't been checked. We provide educational material and educational journeys where if you as a consumer want to learn, you can. But if you want to shop, you can just shop on platform without going off platform. But most importantly, within all of that, on every purchase, you can see the carbon emissions, the water waste, and the plastic waste that you're saving on every purchase compared to the mainstream alternative. And this is like super powerful, because not only does it give you that positive reinforcement you need as a consumer to know, oh, I'm making a better choice, but also we're building in the ability to get rewarded for those purchases, to share it with your communities, to have leaderboards on who is buying the most sustainable products. Like, suddenly what you're doing is building a model which everyone is used to in the commercial sector, in the consumer sector, but it's a small sustainability in the background, because everything you're doing is a better impact. So we end up solving that bigger question of like, we need to buy better, but by actually looking at how people consume and building a platform which basically accommodates that.
Yes, your platform basically is a sustainable convenience marketplace with a silent sustainable.
yeah, exactly. I mean, one thing we get a lot is like, so you're like a green Amazon, and it's like, that's part of it. But I think what's really important within that is that you've got the convenience of Amazon, but you've got the trust of all of the climate sector behind it. So you end up as a consumer being able to shop like you would normally. But on top of that, you've got like all of these extra like positive reinforcement points to know you're making a good choice. And then it's easier to convince people to do it as well, because you're making them feel good about themselves.
This is going to sound a bit strange, but when I research my guests, I like to dig deep in their website. And every level that I went down through your website, I'm thinking, these guys really are clean. There's not a spot of dirt I can question you about. Every decision, every product, everything is certified. The certificates that you give back, you do everything. It was like at every level that I went through, it was like, okay, these guys know what they're doing.
Thanks. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And I mean, look, I think we have to. We're moving through quite an interesting period of sort of consumerism and just sustain like climate sector in general, where the culture shift is already changing. So we've got regulations coming in and laws coming in which are clamping down on like the claims you can make as brands, and you have investment growing in sort of like how can we solve this big issue of the climate crisis but also make money off of it. And then you've also got like media and society talking about these things every single day. And it's like, if you're going to try and build a platform which solves one of these problems, you need to make sure that you are giving a full experience. Because if you're just building a platform which just adds to the confusion that's already there, it doesn't help the individual, and it's only going to help a certain number, like a ceiling of businesses. So actually what we wanted to do was, we could have released a calculator, we could have released a verification platform, we could have released an ed tech platform, but actually to solve this problem we need the full experience, we need the complete profile, so that as an individual you can do all of those things. And like you say, it means that if you do then want to go and spend the time on the platform and learn and research and back up everything that we're saying we're doing, like it's there, like we've enabled it so that we're future proof for that example. So I really appreciate you looking into it, because this is exactly why we've done that.
Well, I think the bottom line is you have to be transparent. If you're saying that you're doing all these things and you're offering all these things, you have to be completely transparent. So if someone does want to go snooping, it's all there.
And even further a step than that is, you can't now. So it used to be that you had to be transparent and sort of be clear about how you do things, and that was enough. But now with the sort of visibility that people are saying things but not actually doing them, you now need, with the new regulation coming in, particularly in the UK and the EU, is you're actually going to need to be able to prove that you do those things. So there are other marketplaces and platforms which say that they check for like multiple different types of evidences. But when you speak to the vendors who went through those processes, they've never been asked. They've never been asked to provide evidence for anything. They've just told them the claims, and the business and the platform has put the claims against the brand. So like for us, it was like, well, we could do that and the consumer would know no better. But that's not gonna, like, for the new world that's being built, it's never going to cut it. And if you build a business based on that, you're going to have to change a heck of a lot in the future. So to go back on and backtrack and ask for all of that stuff, like, hell, we'll just do it to begin with. Makes our lives easier. And then it means that you as a consumer can trust it's been done. We know that we're safe from regulation, but also we provide so much trust just across the sector.
When I was looking through some of the products, I was looking and thinking, what products can a property manager or an owner look at? And I was actually a little bit gobsmacked, because I just sort of took for granted, like in the introduction, the toothbrush. It never occurred to me that I'm holding a piece of plastic twice a day. I was like, oh, I could be doing something about this. And the cotton buds. It's like, oh my God, of course. They end up, in the landfill or in the sea. I was a bit mortified that it had never occurred to me. I think there's so much part of our lives that we don't actually realize that, this is bad.
I think this is exactly it, is that you shouldn't have to be an expert on these things to be able to make those changes. And it's one of the reasons that within this platform of verification, shopping and impact data, there's also a huge amount of education with like backing this all up. So one of the features that we built in was this shop by space feature, where you essentially are shopping by a room in your house, but it's interactive, so you can see products which you might not have considered, like a shampoo bottle. It's like you wouldn't really consider it, but actually when you start to look at the impact that a shampoo bottle has compared to a shampoo bar or a refillable bottle, it's like, oh, actually that's a super easy swap to make, and it's going to save all this impact, and it's going to cost me like the same. And it's just like instantly those sorts of reminders begin to sort of make the change that you probably would make anyway, right? Like if you were aware of all these products that were having an impact, and you knew that there was an alternative that was better and similar price, like who wouldn't make that choice? The difficulty, as you say, is that a lot of people just don't know. So we wanted to build in not just the ability to take action, but actually to give people the education as well in a super like non-judgmental way, because like we get it. You shouldn't have to know all these things to begin with, and we're not going to assume that you do or that you should. So you want to come onto the platform and know nothing about sustainable shopping? I'm all for it. Come on, have a look, read through, and hopefully you'll find something which makes sense to swap out in your lifestyle.
Yeah. And even things like tissues and kitchen paper, paper towel for the kitchen and toilet paper. I was like, oh my God, yes. Coffee cups. So with these products, how do you vet them? What do you ask, or what hoops do they have to jump through?
Yeah, so there's like a 3-step process essentially. We look at business, product, and like product materials. So with the business side of things, we ask for them to relay their claims to us and provide evidence for those claims. So we have like our own tech, which essentially allows that to be quite a smooth process where they will, I don't know, make a claim like they're a living wage employer or that they have fair working policies. There are some compulsory ones within that, which obviously set a threshold for being a business which we'd want on the platform. But along all of that, you have to upload evidence within a certain set of parameters, which we've said are evidences we accept. There are some cases where it might be like, oh, but we have got this certification and it does show this, and then we'll review it on a manual basis. But generally, it's done within those parameters that we have that we've set initially. The same thing for products. So if you've got a t-shirt which you're claiming is made out of organic cotton, it's vegan, it's cruelty-free, whatever, great, good for you, but I want to see the evidence to back that up. So either you've had audits done or you've got a certification claiming that and they've done the audit on you, but it has to be more than just a statement of fact. We get some businesses which will be, to whom it may concern, this is a statement of fact to say that this is a blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's not that I don't trust you, it's that I need to be able to prove it. So we are, again, within the parameters of evidence that we've accepted, they'll upload those evidences and it will be verified, and then it will show or not show if they haven't verified it on the platform. And then the third part of that is you could have all of the accreditations and certifications in the world, but if you're still making a product which is worse for the environment than the mainstream alternative that's currently out there, then I don't really care that much, because it's not going to have a better impact product. So a good example of this is we've had a clothing brand who are vegan clothing brands. They give to charity on every purchase. It's really great. But the product itself is almost an exact replica of a Primark socks or a Primark t-shirt. And it's like, I get that you're giving to charity within this and you're claiming that it's vegan. But the actual impact of the product is one and the same to the mainstream fast fashion out on the street. So what within the materials, what we're looking for are better impact products. So we have built a calculator within that, which is completely sort of automated and uses its own machine learning within that to quantify not only the products from the vendor of the impact of the carbon emissions, the water waste, and the plastic waste that is emitting in its life cycle, but also against a mainstream alternative of one of the best-selling brands that we've chosen. And what we can see is, well, is it actually better? Because if it is better, great. Like, you don't need to have all the accreditations because it is a better impact product. But is it not better? And then, we don't want it on the platform. So, these are the sorts of things we're looking at when we vet a company. But also, that leads then into the user journey as well. Because if we've got that data on the product, it means that you as a user can aggregate that data. And then as you make purchases, you can see all the positive impact you're having. We beta launched 2 weeks ago, and we've already saved consumers over 150 kilograms of carbon emissions, over 100 kilograms of plastic waste, over 10,000 liters of water waste. And that's because we're quantifying the impact of these products. And that's really important for the vetting and the verification part.
Did I see that a customer can then keep tabs on their cumulative impact as well? How does that work? Once you open an account, it just accumulates?
Yeah, so if you create an account on the platform and then you make purchases, every purchase which has the impact data associated to it will then aggregate into your account. So you could buy 10 products and they all save, I don't know, 10 kilograms of carbon emissions. and you'll then see that you've saved 100 kilograms of carbon emissions throughout your account. What we're now building into that is the ability to share that and talk and shout about how good you're being as a consumer, but also the ability for us to set certain milestones for rewarding people as well. So it encourages the consumer to keep coming back and aggregating that in one place rather than going to multiple different places. But also allows us to sort of show the impact that we're having as a community, because not only for the individual is that aggregating, but also for the entire Canopey platform, we're seeing, even if you don't have an account, we're still aggregating that impact. So it's all completely anonymous, like we wouldn't know that it's you, like on the community impact, but it does mean we can show that the community is saving however many thousands of liters of water or whatever it is.
Fantastic. So it's a loyalty program for Canopey and the planet.
Yeah, exactly. It's a loyalty program for Canopey and the trees Canopy.
Yeah, actually, so the name Canopey,
so
did that come from trees? Where did the name come from?
No, so originally we branded as Greener, just the name Greener. And there were a few reasons why that never really completely sat well with us. One is that it's pretty on the nose about being a sort of sustainable brand, which is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about sort of opening that up to a wider audience. And then the second part of that is, if we are going to try and sort of provide a brand which not just talks to more people, but has an impact with a small s, right? Is you don't want to then be shouting all the time about sustainability. You want to be talking about other things within that. And that's quite hard to do when your brand just shouts sustainability with a large S. So there were other reasons behind that as well, like, just general commercial reasons. Like if we wanted to expand around the world, like what sort of trademarks could we get? What sort of domain names could we get? All of these like quite boring questions. But really the sole reason for changing to Canopey was that a canopy is the umbrella which everyone goes under. Everyone is welcome under that canopy. You don't have to be an eco-warrior to be involved in what we're doing. It still talks to nature with the name, but it's not inherently about being green. So, canopies are also tent canopies, right? That's where we started, in a field, cleaning up tent waste and consumer product waste. There's callbacks to the brand. But I think for the consumer, the main thing is that, look, you're looking at a brand name which just doesn't assume anything of you. It's a brand name which is quite fun. It's easy to say. It's a .com domain, and you can do all of these great things with absolute convenience, with a small s sustainability. And I think that is why we wanted to rebrand, and why Canopey sort of encompassed that wider mission, of sort of trying to speak to the wider consumer market than just the eco-warrior niche. I still love that niche, don't get me wrong. I'm part of that niche. but it's just about how can we have the biggest impact. So the brand needs to encompass that as well.
It's always funny. Every time I hear eco-warrior, I just visualize Xena. I don't even know what her whole title was. I never watched the show, but I know she was a warrior.
That's hilarious. I think a really weird side story, but I think that on my mum's 21st birthday party, this is where she met my dad, she was dressed up as Xena, and he was dressed up as like Hercules or something. It's some weird party back in the like 80s.
They bred an eco-warrior. Okay.
Yeah, I know. Look at that. Probably proud of that, I bet.
Okay, so back to when you assess a company to sell a product, let's like take a step back and let's look at the bigger picture, as in your company. Now, there are numerous ways that, like I was saying, your clean record. So you are carbon positive, which again, that sounds actually bad, but it's good.
Yeah, I know. It's always funny because carbon negative and carbon positive mean exactly the same thing. It's like, and they're the complete opposite words. I mean, look, we, just touching on that point, I think I get really quite frustrated when companies, unless you're like a carbon removal company, when they say that they have no impact, because it's impossible. Like you're a living, breathing human who is doing things when you're working, so therefore you're having an impact. So what we do is we quantify what impact we're having as a company. We've minimized that wherever we can right now, and we'll continue to review that and minimize again. But then with anything else, we're using, verified carbon offsets to make sure that if we are emitting, which inevitably we will be, then we want to make sure that we're drawing down more than we're emitting, so that we're not just balancing that out, but we're having an even more positive impact as a company as well.
Yeah. And what about the 1%?
1% for the planet. Yeah, I mean, I love them. I've always known about them. I think that committing a portion of your revenue, and it's revenue, it's not profits. So,
wow. Okay.
It's a part of a commitment as a company to give back to this wider conversation of positive impact. And I think that it doesn't have to be fancy. They're an organization which does their work. You can see the projects you're supporting, you can choose them. And I think that they're having a fantastic impact, and we knew we wanted it to be part of the model, and we've budgeted that into our revenue model and what we do. And that also ties into sort of like tree planting as well, because we don't use trees as carbon emissions offsets. They're completely separate for us, because one, it's too unreliable. You don't know what's going to happen to that tree in the future. Two, you shouldn't use, it's too hard to generalize the emission savings when you plant a tree compared to actual carbon removal. So yeah, for our tree planting, look, we've destroyed over 3 trillion trees over the life cycle of human industrialization. We still destroy billions every year. I think we have a moral obligation as a business which wants to have a better impact to regenerate what we've destroyed. I don't think it would be realistic for us to say we'll be able to regenerate everything as a society. Like, there's too much urbanization, there's too much industrialization, there's economies like which run off timber and all of these different things, but there are ways of making that regenerative which I think are important. And for us, alongside 1% for the planet, alongside our carbon offsets, we wanted to make sure we were planting and having a commitment to planting a number of trees over our life cycle. So we took the Million Tree Pledge to plant 1 million trees before 2030. Instantly, as soon as we raised our first round of investment, we planted 10,000 of them, and we'll continue to be implementing that into our roadmap as well.
So it's not just that, it's alongside the ocean too. So
the
network.
Yeah. So look, I come from working with Greenpeace, and I am a surfer, and I have been a member of and supported and done some work for Surfers Against Sewage as an organization in the UK for probably over a decade now. And I just really love their mission as a charity. They're a group of people who live and love the ocean. They don't have to be surfers, even though it's in the name, who are just fed up with pollution going into our oceans. A truckload of plastic enters the ocean every minute. Almost every single seabird in the world will have microplastics within its biology now. There are things which we fundamentally need to change, and that's not even touching on the fact that water companies just discharge sewage into our lakes, waters, oceans daily. So I always knew that we were going to find a way to support that organization, because look, I love them as an organization, but also they're doing fantastic work. So when the business was set up, they have a thing called the Ocean Network. Originally, it was called the 250 Club. So there were like 250 companies, and it's just grown from there. So being part of that means we're not only collaborating and working with other businesses which care about stuff, but also we are giving back to an organization which is making actual direct change to government and beyond, to change real policy going forward. So another thing which we can do for a social and environmental cause.
Yeah. And then let's zoom right in. On a previous episode, we talked about the emissions and the problem with tech. So your tech, your servers are green.
Yeah, so look, I think that there's two conversations that come up when you talk about tech. There's sort of carbon intensity, and then the actual what the servers are running off of, and the carbon emissions that come out of that. Now, I'm a big believer that if you eventually move towards a 100% renewable society, then intensity becomes almost a moot point because you're intensifying what on renewables, so it becomes less worrying. However, we're not there yet as a society, so it's important at this point in time. For us, the easiest way for us to do that was to host our servers on renewables, and there are great organizations which are already doing that. Google are amazingly already changing their entire ecosystem to that. Obviously part of our platform is built on Shopify, which uses Google servers as well, so that's really helpful. We have an entire Google ecosystem for our workspace and for our impact calculator APIs and various other things. So it was a conscious choice. And interestingly, it's something we've had to push back on a lot, because we've worked with development agencies, or we've worked with certain developers where they've been like, yeah, but it's like better if we just use like AWS, or, oh, but I'd rather use Azure or whatever. And it's like, I get your argument for like the tech side of these things, but you're talking about like three quite equal platforms here between AWS, Google Cloud Platform, and Azure. And it's like, I think if we can make a choice of like what we want to be doing as a company, we should always be considering that as part of the decision. Plus, it would be kind of ironic if we hosted on Amazon and we were challenging Amazon. So there are other reasons behind that. But at the end of the day, look, if we can do anything to improve the impact of any operation, but particularly as a tech company, the tech we're using, then we absolutely will find the way to do that. And your office. I would just like to add something as well. I think, like, look, we're going to grow as a company as well, and that will bring its own challenges within that. And I think that the biggest thing that any company can do in this space is to be transparent about it. And look, we've got to weigh up the impact that we have from the actual service we provide to individuals and businesses compared to how we operationally run. And obviously at all points we'll be considering the best impact we can have as a company operationally. But if we find that actually, suddenly we need to change something so that we can accommodate another 10 million people in the future, I don't know, some random number, we've got to weigh up the impacts, because you can't take a sweeping statement on any company in any sector and say you all should do this, because it's going to be quite nuanced to the work that you're doing. And it's one of the faults of the climate sector is that we assume everyone can do the same thing. And that shouldn't be the case. So I'm really transparent about the fact that we intend to grow, and we intend, therefore, that's going to have more impact. But I also intend at every decision within that, that we are considering the impact it has and how we can reduce it. So I just wanted to add that in, because it is really important from a tech perspective, but also just a general business sustainability perspective.
No, I completely get that. Yep, absolutely. And I know that your values are positive, bold, and informal.
Yeah, and look, I think there's a few things in this. Like, the climate movement is generally quite negative. We're talking about quite a scary and real thing. We shouldn't underestimate the state that we're in as a species and as a society, and a lot of the time it is worse than we think. So that's the doom and gloom side, but we hear about that all the time. And I think that the only way you're going to convince millions, if not billions, of people to change behavior without thinking they're changing behavior, of course, is to talk about positive things and talk about hope and talk about the great thing that you've just done as an individual and that we're doing as a community, and again being transparent about what that means and the impact it has. And so I think we need to be positive, not just as a company but as a movement. It's very easy to get caught up on the negatives of the climate crisis, and it's important that we are when it's important to be, because there are certain movements which need to be talking about that. Greenpeace is a great example. They should be talking about the impact that HSBC or Barclays or the government are having with their investments in whatever, and they should be making that very clear and front and center of their message. But when you're a business offering something to a consumer, you don't want to be telling them how shit everything is. You want to be telling them, actually you can be you can help and you can be a part of that, and it's cool, and it doesn't have to be a huge thing. Like small actions make big changes. So it's all about that. The second one is bold. Look, too many companies in our sector are willing to just sort of like sit back and ride the wave of like eco, and like I'm not interested in it. Like, I want to be calling out the big boy polluters. I want to be talking to the big retailers. I want to be making sure that people are aware that there is a company here which is standing up for the values that we need to be following as a society. And Canopey will do that as a company and as founders. So like, we're not afraid to stick our head above the parapet and get the inevitable pushback from big companies, but with the always the mission of just making it easier for individuals to be sustainable. And I think that not enough companies are doing that. And we shouldn't be afraid as founders to pick a side sometimes. It doesn't have to be judgmental to the individual. It doesn't have to be aggressive. It doesn't have to be negative. It can all be, positive. It can be welcoming. It can be, and leading into the third one, informative. And it needs to be those things. But look, have some balls and stand up and just like, call out the bad stuff that's happening, and provide a better option, because we need to. And then, I think, it's interesting talking about these values, because I think that a lot of companies have like corporate values, and it's often just a load of, whatever. And I think that for us, like, these aren't just like statements on a page. These are things which are embedded within the culture of the company. I remember reading a long time ago Nike's sort of like list of 10 commandments, as it were, in the company, and it is embedded within everything they did as a startup, all the way up to working, with Jordan and all the rest. And I think that for us, these things are not just statements we're making to sound like we're the right company. These are things which, like, they don't even need to be on the platform. They're just part of us. What we do, we breathe it. And we'll continue to push them. But part of that, and it's a little bit of a bugbear of mine actually, is be informative and be the informed voice. Because sustainability isn't something which anyone can just come into and go, I know everything about sustainability. Because like, even those of us who have been in this sector for our whole careers, have studied it, have worked along the best climate scientists in the world, like, we know very little about this sector still. So I think that have some humility, and if you are going to come into the sector, make sure you are informed in what you're doing, because we're seeing too many companies start which don't know enough and claim to be making a better impact, but actually aren't having a better impact. And that not only misleads the consumer, but it does nothing for the movement. And it's all done with good intention. Like, these people want to help, and I want them to get involved in the sector. But there is a difference between doing that blindly and commercially and thinking you're helping, to being informed and the expert in the room and knowing what you're driving and why you're driving that way. So for Canopey, it was important that we weren't just positive and bold and fun, but actually, like, we know what we're talking about. And that's not just coming from us as founders. That's talking to people who are working in our sector and getting advice and listening to feedback and improving and consistently being transparent about that. So informed is almost like the umbrella for everything we do. We're bold, we're positive, we're fun, blah 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 blah, but behind all of that, it's always backed up. You'll never see something which we haven't checked before we say it, basically.
Amazing. We have to start wrapping up now, but was there anything else about Canopey that we should know about that we haven't touched on yet?
I think, look, we're beta live, we're making improvements. We want people to come and rip us apart and give us feedback and tell us what they hate. Like, this is super important stage for us, because we get all the positive comments, right, from our families and our friends and our like community that we're building. But like, I want people who are gonna like find the problems. So it's a weird thing to ask, but like, if you're in the UK and you are looking to like rip something to shreds, like, come and do it. But I think, like, the other thing is that for too long, this journey has been too complicated for the consumer. And be wary of the platforms which are telling you that they do everything correctly, because many of them aren't. And all I'd say is, like, look, we have put the work in to give you a full like experience, and I don't want people to underestimate the importance of that. So, come to the Canopey, join us, and help us provide an alternative for everyone to be able to buy better, consciously or unconsciously. That's important.
Yeah, and I think that with this podcast, it was, it's to help property managers and property owners, but actually, as individuals, we could be starting with ourselves. So I'm thinking, what's it like brushing your teeth with a bamboo toothbrush? That's like this whole new look, this whole new get your head around, okay, so toothbrush handles don't have to be plastic. It's just what we're used to.
Yeah.
So
I also think, from a property and residential and like that side of the industry, it's like, look, you're living and you're talking about where people are creating their habitat. And I think that, look, this is where we engage and live as humans every single day. And even if we're on holiday, like, that's where we're feeling at home, and we're engaging with the products and the way the room is built and all of these things. Subconsciously, that's happening in every single part of the journey within the residential, hospitality, property, and retail industry. Like, it is embedded within us as humans to have communal areas, and whether that's with your family or a wider group. So what I would just say to that part of the journey and sector is, like, talk to us, partner with organizations like us, make the experience for the people you're trying to serve subconsciously better, because that's going to create more of a shift than you realize. If they're just living and like involved in that part, like, and they're seeing these things in their periphery, it makes all the difference. So we'd love to sort of engage with that side of the community more. So yeah, please do reach out.
It's very interesting. Again, my mind's racing. So I didn't see how much a toothbrush costs on your website, but I wonder if you're going to have a sustainable property, to actually allocate a toothbrush per guest. And you never know, because if they like something, if they know, actually, so having a toothbrush per guest and showing the guest what they have saved, like the impact they have saved, and then they can always buy that toothbrush from your website. They can continue it on, but implementing some of your products within a property and showing the guest what effect having this product in your property is having, then could be a great knock-on effect.
It's great. Also, it just makes you look like, from a sort of self-indulgent perspective, like, it makes you look great because you've considered it, and you have considered the fact that we want to give an experience which leaves less of an impact on the planet. And it doesn't have to be the soul of the company. It doesn't have to be the root message in everything you do, but it can just be things that are just considered here and there. And it's important. The thing I would say about that as well is that, ours is consumer facing, whereas all of our brands sell wholesale as well, right? So if there is the conversation of, we want to provide X amount of toothbrushes to our properties for a wholesale price, like, speak to us, because we can connect that conversation up with the brands that you're interested in. So
fantastic. Oh, wow. Okay, we have to start wrapping up. What I'm going to do is I will put the link for Canopey in the description below, and if you have any questions for Thomas, please pop them in the comments below and he'll get back to you. Thomas, this has been a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I really appreciate you having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye. Are you ready to start on your own green path journey? Why not take a look at the Green Step program? This has been tailor-made to take you step by step down the green path. You only see one step at a time, and that's all you focus on. Before you know it, you've gone down the path. To learn more, just head to thegreenpathpodcast.com.